Hello.
Enjoy, Harjo. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you? Are you Mark O'Connor?
I am. I'm so pleased to see you.
It's good to see you. I was trying to remember when I was at Slippery Rock.
It was a while ago, right before I started. You met with this beautiful colleague of mine, Raquel Permenter, and boy, it was probably about 16 years ago. And
Uh-huh.
she rhapsodized about your visit and said you played the saxophone, and it was the best speaker we've ever had.
That's nice. I can remember walking across that campus and the people. I didn't remember everyone's names, but if I see people's faces. And so I have really good memories of Slippery Rock.
I'm really hoping Raquel will be here today. She just retired last semester, but I'm in touch with her, so I'm hoping she will be here.
Uh-huh. Okay. So we go live at in half an hour, right?
Correct. So I think
Okay.
this was just sort of a sound check. Um, Yeah, we're starting at 5 o'clock. I think that was a misprint on the flyer. And here's my
Yeah.
colleague, Dr. Navu.
Okay. Which is 4 my time. You guys are on Eastern time.
No, the whole idea, this is John. The whole idea is so that way we could make sure everything was working for you before we started. Give us a little
Okay.
break. So
I need to see view. Why is this not?
I was there. You can.
There we go.
So we are live on YouTube.
Oh, we are. So be.
Yeah, we've had more than 630 people registered for this. So
Oh.
great.
I'm coming to. It's University of Pennsylvania. Uh, where am I flying into to get a honorary doctorate in about a month? I think.
Sweet.
Yeah. So I guess that's related to you, the overall system. Not your particular school. Yeah. Anyway, I'm glad, I've had this idea because of all these Zoom things, is to get photographs of like major libraries around the world and then put the photographs so that in my virtual it'll look I'll have an incredible library behind me.
That's a great idea.
I
What's your
cried.
favorite library? May I ask that question?
Well, I'll be out there. Maybe I'll photograph it when I'm out there. I was out at Merwin's place in Maui, and they're the Merwin Conservancy is turning his home into they're going to turn it into a retreat place. That I got to go into the room, nothing had been moved. And he had a stand with the dog collars, like a little altar for all the dogs he loved. That's what I remember. That's what I remember about his room, his bedroom. And then he had his library is this long room. I don't know, it'd be hard to photograph that, but I was thinking I'm going to get a photograph of Merwin's library, and I'll do different libraries behind me. That's. But it could be for a good story. So I won't say it's my library. I don't need to do that, but
You can let people assume.
yeah, yeah.
The childhood public library in the small Jersey town where I grew up in until I was 8, it's still there, and it's a very 70s building, and it was just wonderful. And, that we didn't have a lot of money growing up. My mom took us to the library all the time, and I'm a university professor now because of that place.
Yeah, our library, and I don't think it's still there. I should go by the street. It's all the ghetto. Yeah, now it kind of was then, but I didn't think of it that way. And there was a corner, like one of those little strip malls. There was a strip mall, and there was a library in there. And that's where I would go once a week, and I'd get the quota of books and bring them home and read them all, and then go back and get more books. I'm going to edit my rename so my email address isn't up there. There we go.
How many emails do you want to get by the end of this
No.
if you're personal email?
I'm on a quest to get my emails, keep my emails down because it gets so overwhelming. And I have an assistant. I have a Joy Harjo PL at Gmail that goes to my assistant, and she tells me how crazy it is. But I mean, it's good. There've been times where I didn't have any, there was nothing coming through, so I can't complain. I mean, I can complain, but that's one of my year's goals always is not to complain.
It's a newsome blessing.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So what's the weather like over there today?
It feels like a southern day. I moved here from Alabama, and it is very much like an Alabama April outside today. It's beautiful. It's just shy of 80 degrees. I couldn't resist. I was outside for an hour this morning, just piddling in the yard because it might rain any day.
Yeah, it's hot here too.
It's perfect weather. This is the time usually when we bring prospective faculty to campus,
Uh-huh.
because we won't bring them in January because they would never
No.
show up and teach with us.
That's when you brought me, was in
Oh, it's the end of the
first-
semester. That's why. That's the only reason. It's the end of the semester. It makes winter
Everybody kept-
worthwhile.
Mhm.
Everybody kept promising, this is the worst weather we've ever had. And I'm like, snow's great. I haven't seen it in 2 years.
Yeah, we have a wind advisory. Every once in a while, I see it whipping around. It looks calm right now, but it's supposed to get up. I'm going to check about 70 degrees. I haven't been out. I've been on a call. I have a keynote to write when we're done that I have to go tape at 8:45 in the morning. So I usually don't say yes to keynotes, but it'll be okay.
Are you the commencement speaker at Penn State, you said, in a few weeks, or just for the doctor you're going out?
Just for the doctorate, I'm not going to be the speaker. I will be the speaker at Smith, though.
Oh, nice.
Yes, I was excited about that one too, because of all the the poets from Smith, and so I'll be doing a 10 to 15 minute short speech.
Are they face to face? Have they been this semester face to face?
I don't know. I think some of it with social distancing and so on is because there was an incident there that I was reading about. So there are people there. Mhm. Oh, so you said we're live on Facebook. I mean, on YouTube. We
Yeah,
should
live on YouTube.
Yeah.
And we have about a little over 100 people already in the room with us. We just can't see and hear them.
Okay, I guess. Okay. So I don't have a moment to step out.
You do.
Okay.
Absolutely. Turn your camera off. Come back when you're ready.
Okay, I will do that. I'm going to step out for a few minutes and I'll be right back. Okay, it's nice meeting you, and hello everyone out there that we can't see, but you guys are here listening to us, and I guess you heard all of that. So, okay, we'll be talking to you soon. Okay, I'll stop my camera and my.
Dr. Connor, did you want me to share that information about the answer to the recording okay. So just there was a question in the chat earlier. The meeting will be recorded, and then we'll share the location maybe at the end of the session. So we can see the chat, and shout out or shout back to University of Southern Indiana about Harjo visiting you guys 25 years ago. The official start time of the talk is 5 p.m. Eastern time. So Jacqueline, I think that should be 2 p.m. Pacific time. The meeting time says 4:30. That's just when the room opened so that there wasn't this rush of people all at once. And then Abby, we officially have an end time of 7 p.m. and we're trying to be very respectful of Joy's time to make sure to end no later than then.
We should have had a warm-up band.
I mean, I'm good at Zoom, but I'm not that good to put on like background music. I have a screen to put up, but I have to be host to do that. Mark, you're getting requests to sing.
I think that would not be a good thing. My skill set lie in other areas.
Do you need background music? I have my new album.
Yes, please. Oh my God, that'd be great.
Because we have 15 minutes. I was going to play one during the thing, but I can put it on. I've been playing it, and I'll just put it on. I won't put it on really loud. Let's see what I can. Okay, let me find the album on here. Oh man, let's see. I'll find it. I've got it. Here it is. And then I'll just put it lower. This song was taught to me by my cousin Joe Sulphur. It's a welcoming song, saying something like, we were brought here by the old ones and they're always watching out for us. Alena, 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 Alena. If we need to go, Alena, 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 Alena. Oh bunny, oh bunny, Alena, 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 Alena. Ajalugi magongi, Alena, Alena. Hey young eagle. We're here to celebrate life. It's so short. We're put here to love and take care of each other. So, ho bunny, let's dance.
Azulagi magangi ale no ayung di holy. Brilliant.
Yeah. We were running out of breath as we ran to meet ourselves. We were surfacing the edge of our ancestors' fights and ready to strike. It was difficult to lose days in the Indian bar if you were straight. Easy if you played pool and drank to remember to forget. We made plans to be professional, and some of us could sing. Bebop-da-bop, 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 ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. We drove to the edge of the mountains with a drum. We made sense of our beautiful crazed lives under the starry stars. We learned the devil from the Christians. We sang. We were the heathens, but needed to be saved from them. Thin chance. We knew we were all related in this story. A little gin will clarify the dark and make us all feel like dancing. Make us feel like dancing. Make us feel like dancing. Bebop, 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 bebop. Argued with the music as I filled the jukebox with dimes in June. 40 years later, and we still want justice. 40 years later, and we still want justice. We are still America. Way up, hey up, way up, ho. Way up, hey up, way up, ho. Way up. I should probably start taking it down a little. Put down that bag of potato chips, that white bread, that bottle of pop. Turn off that cell phone, computer, and remote control. Open the door, then close it behind you. Take a breath offered by friendly winds. They travel the earth gathering essences of plants to clean. Give it back with gratitude. If you sing, it will give your spirit lift to fly to the stars' ears and back. Acknowledge this earth who has cared for you since you were a dream planting itself precisely within your parents' desire. Let your moccasin feet take you to the encampment of the guardians who have known you before time, who will be there after time. They sit before the fire that has been there without time. Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial insecure jitters. Be respectful of the small insects, birds, and animal people who accompany you. Ask their forgiveness for the harm we humans have brought down upon them. Don't worry. The heart knows the way, though there may be high-rises, interstates, checkpoints, armed soldiers, massacres, wars, and those who will despise you because they despise themselves. The journey might take you a few hours, a day, a year, a few years, 100, 1,000, or even more. Watch your mind. Without training, it might run away and leave your heart for the immense human feast set by the thieves of time. Do not hold regrets. When you find your way to the circle, to the fire kept burning by the keepers of your soul, you will be welcomed. You must clean yourself with sage, cedar, or other healing plant. Cut the ties you have to failure and shame. Let go the pain you are holding in your mind, your shoulders, your heart, all the way to your feet. Let go the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are heading in our direction. Ask for forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who love you. Call your spirit back. It may be caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. You must call in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as you would a beloved child. Welcome your spirit back from its wandering. It may return in pieces, in tatters. Gather them together. They will be happy to be found after being lost for so long. Your spirit will need to sleep a while after it is bathed and given clean clothes. Now you can have a party. Invite everyone you know who loves and supports you. Keep room for those who have no place else to go. Make a giveaway. And remember, keep the speeches short. Then you must do this. Help the next person find their way through the dark.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our virtual event with the United States' official national poet, three-time Poet Laureate Joy Harjo. I'm Dr. Julie Naviu, Assistant Professor of African American and American Studies in the English Department at Slippery Rock University. I'm delighted to be one of your two moderators. My co-moderator is Dr. Mark O'Connor, Associate Professor of Creative Writing and Director of Writers in the Schools program here at SRU. Today's event is sponsored by the coalition We Stand Together, a collection of presidents and chancellors from colleges and universities across the nation. The group was created to discuss and take back to campuses ongoing efforts and strategies for helping to eliminate systemic racism and promote social justice. SRU's president, William Berry, is a member of the coalition. The other schools included in We Stand Together as co-sponsors of tonight's event are on your screen, and they are University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, University of Houston, Clear Lake, Mississippi Valley State University, Edward Waters College, University of Northern Colorado, Washington State University Tri-Cities, Mississippi University for Women, Eastern Central University, South Dakota Mines University, University of Southern Indiana, University of California, Merced, Cleveland State University, Ohio State University, California State University, Fullerton, St. Cloud State University, Lincoln University of Missouri, Millersville University, California State University, Bakersfield. Our gathering today is part of an ongoing speaker series to incorporate politics, activism, and arts. Now, before we begin, as a state step towards healing and reconciliation, it's important that we acknowledge the traditional native lands on which we stand. I'm participating from Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Osage and the Six Nations of the Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Seneca, Cayuga, and Tuscarora. Let this acknowledgement be an opportunity for us all to contemplate our place on their land. We also want to recognize and stand in solidarity with those individuals who are continuing to call for racial justice and equitable community and affirm that Black lives matter. We commit to move beyond words to programs and actions that fully embody a commitment to full participation and equity. Beyond the general need for acknowledgement of our nation's past, such a statement is quite fitting with Harjo's work and the social justice theme of her virtual visit. Joy Harjo made history on June 19th, 2019, when she became the first Native American to hold the appointment of Poet Laureate of the United States. Since then, she has become only the second person since the position was established in 1936 to hold the position for 3 terms. However, this is only the most recent of a series of distinctions in a career that spans 4 decades, 9 books of poetry, several plays and children's books, 2 memoirs, 6 award-winning music albums, and the role of editor of 2 anthologies. The anthology Living Nations, Living Words, an anthology of First Peoples poetry, is the companion to her signature Poet Laureate project, which is a digital project featuring an interactive story map. The project features samples of work from 47 Native Nations poets and is a part of the Library of Congress's newly developed audio collection. Harjo comes to us tonight from Tulsa, Oklahoma, where she lives. She's a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, holds a Tulsa Artist Fellowship, directs For Girls Becoming, an arts mentorship program for young Muskogee women, and is a founding board member and chair of the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation. Harjo's most recent book of poetry, the 2019 An American Sunrise, was a 2020 Oklahoma Book Award winner. Her 2015 collection, Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings, was shortlisted for the Griffin Prize and named a notable book of the year by the American Library Association. Her first memoir, 2013's Crazy Brave, was awarded the PEN USA Literary Award in Creative Nonfiction and the American Book Award. If you're a big fan of Harjo's, look for her second memoir, Poet Warrior, A Call for Love and Justice, to be released fall of this year by W.W. Norton. I'd like to point out this work represents just a sampling of the most recent 8 years of Harjo's professional writing output, and I'm sure I missed several national and extraordinarily prestigious awards and recognition. Additionally, Harjo plays saxophone and flutes professionally, and she sings. She tours with her band, the Aerodynamics. Tours have included the US, Europe, South America, India, Africa, and Canada. Her most recent album, titled I Pray for My Enemies, you got to hear before we began today. It was released last month. The album has been described as elegant jazz, urban soul, and inner city reservation grit. Harjo began writing poetry as a member of the University of New Mexico's Native Student Organization in response to Native empowerment movements. She went on to earn her MFA at the Iowa Writers Workshop and teach English, creative writing, and American Indian Studies at University of California, Los Angeles, University of New Mexico, University of Arizona, Arizona State, University of Illinois, University of Colorado, University of Hawaii, Institute of American Indian Arts, and University of Tennessee, while performing music and poetry nationally and internationally. Harjo is a multifaceted talent who bends genres and what it means to be an author and artist by participating in multiple artistic forms, including poetry, autobiography, and music. In the midst of a tense racial time in the United States, where protests and politically intense climates have brought issues of racial inequality to the forefront of American consciousness, Joy Harjo reminds us of the importance of continuing to talk about and acknowledge Native American voices. She writes about English as a colonizing language, but she doesn't advocate a hardline rejection of history and Western values either. Her work, such as the poetry collection Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings, teaches me, even as a college professor, much about the history, cultural values, and contributions that America's Indigenous peoples have made and continue to make. Much of her art concerns coming together and understanding various perspectives, treating Native American experience as a non-homogeneous entity. Her writing underscores the diversity and voices of Native American tribes and the legacy of colonialism in America. She pushes us as readers to question our own positions of power and roles in American history in such an elegant way. Her writing speaks to the need for all of us to come together, as we do today, for conversation and work. I'm as excited as you guys for this event. We'll next have a live talk by Joy Harjo, followed by an informal discussion with her on questions that many of you submitted ahead of tonight's event. Please keep track of questions you have during the performance. You'll be able to enter them into the chat, and Dr. O'Connor and I will do our best to incorporate as many of your live questions as possible. Without further ado, please give a warm virtual welcome to Joy Harjo.
Mado, thank you for that introduction. That was quite wonderful and elaborate. And so next I would say, well, my list of failures is much longer to get here, to be here. Anyway, I'm talking to you from Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is the Muskogee, part of the Muskogee Creek Nation Reservation. And we are also border the Cherokee Nation here and the Osage peoples. So I'm going to start, I'm going to start with, it's called an Ars Poetica, which is a poem about the art of writing poetry. Well, the art of writing poetry to me is the same as the art of living. One of my mentors, Audre Lorde, taught me that there was no separation between the personal and the political. And I think too of the role of poets, especially during these times, maybe all times, and our role as poets have to do with truth telling and being witnesses, being witness to um, social unrest, to divisiveness in the country, being witness to a pandemic, being witness to kind acts, being witness to um, incredible small acts of compassion that keep us all going. Break my heart. There are always flowers, love cries, or blood. Someone is always leaving by exile, death, or heartbreak. The heart is a fist. It pockets prayer or holds rage. It's a timekeeper, music maker, or backstreet truth teller. Baby, 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 you can't say what's been said before, even though words are creatures of habit. You can't force poetry with a ruler or gel it at a desk. Mystery is blind, but wills you to untie the cloth in eternity. Police with their guns cannot enter here to move us off our lands. History will always find you and wrap you in its 1,000 arms. Someone will lift from the earth without wings. Another will fall from the sky through knots of a tree. Chaos is primordial. All words have roots here. You will never sleep again, though you will never stop dreaming. The end can only follow the beginning, and it will zigzag through time, governments, and lovers. Be who you are, even if it kills you, and it will, over and over again, even as you live. Break my heart. Why don't you? I'm going to read this little poem called "The Fight," and then I'm going to read a little bit from the new memoir, because I need my great-grandfather right now. We all go through challenges, and this one is about dealing with enemies, and sometimes, human beings are human beings, and this is about that kind of just the fight. We all go through fights. Sometimes the fights are our own, those thoughts that wake us, those thoughts, that turning wheel, the turning mental wheel of worries. I guess there's a gigantic turning wheel right now in this country of worries. And sometimes you just have to name it what it is. Sometimes there's a lot of power in naming something what it is, and then it leaves, and then it has no more power over you to fight. The rising sun paints the feet of night-crawling enemies, and they scatter into the burning hills. I have fought each of them. I know them by name from before I could speak. I've used every weapon to make them retreat. Yet they return every night if I don't keep guard. They elbow through openings in faith, tear the premise of trust, and stick their shields through the doubt of smoke to challenge me. I grow tired of the heartache of every small and large war, passed from generation to generation. But it is not in me to give up. I was taught to give honor to the house of warriors, which cannot exist without the house of the peacemakers. Then I'm going to move a little towards this memoir. And no, that's the keynote I have to write. I'm sorry. It's here. There it is. So I have close to me, we all come into this world with guardians. And then there's just people, even, poets that, like Emily Dickinson. I feel like I have a friend of Emily Dickinson, and that sometimes I have a dialogue with her, and we all have poetry ancestors or thought idea ancestors that we maybe even engage with a kind of conversation with them when we read their work or listen to their music. There's, it's kind of an ongoing relationship. I've always felt close to my great-grandfather, Henry Marcy Harjo, and he's come, sometimes I feel like it's he'll help me with words or phrases. And so I wanted to read a little bit about him, and because I feel like I need him right now. And this is from Poet Warrior. I do not remember when I first became aware of the presence of my great-grandfather Henry Marcy Harjo from Eufaula Canadian tribal town and Wind Clan, except that he was just there and has been looking after me since childhood. He helped me find the way as I have been lost many times. I always come back to stand on the same islands of loss in family, tribal, and earth history. I return to memories of fracture, as if all the broken pieces have voices and they call me back to witness. They are in need of something I have not been able to give them. They want to be heard. They want to speak. When I speak, when I create, I am afraid of failing my art, my people, my family. I cannot render with the delicacy, fierceness, and tough beauty in which I perceive. I have failed many times what was given to me to do. I call out, as I have many times before in these moments. Why did you give me this legacy of poetry, this music, this body, this place in which to speak when I don't look, act the part? I'm not the best representative of my people or anyone else. And you made me a woman when women's voices are not regarded in this society in which we are now living. That's when I feel and hear my great-grandfather standing near me. He lived a life of integrity and gave all that he had with a great love for his people. He was a Baptist minister. He helped start the Muro Indian Children's Home, a home for Indian orphans, and he began a mission near Stuart, Florida, for the Seminole people. He was a superintendent for Wilaka Mission, an Indian school in Indian Territory. He was also appointed postal superintendent of the community of Wilaka. He sat in the House of Kings and tribal government and was appointed by President Herbert Hoover to hold the office of principal chief during an interim election. I have uncovered many records of proceedings in which he stood as a moral witness for many disputes and transactions. My great-grandfather was born just after removal when our people were reestablishing themselves in these new lands. It was a Wild West atmosphere full of drifters, grifters, preachers, and other refugees, all looking for a home in the place where we had been promised by the US government we'd be free of the settlers who took our homes and pushed us west. After our people started to reconstruct our lives here, to heal in what became known as Indian Territory, the Civil War broke out, killing even more to add to the losses from that trail of death, and resulted in even more theft of land in retribution. Railroads, there was a train going by just right in time. Railroads pushed through, taking even more land. The Allotment Act was passed to steal what was left by illegally maneuvering with laws, murders, and any other method of theft. Then oil was discovered. My great-grandfather profited from the sale of discovery of oil in his allotted lands. Most of his and my great-grandmother's allotted lands were in the Henrietta and Eufaula areas, but they had lands assigned near Kiefer, in the largest oil pool in the world. My great-grandfather had the first car in Okmulgee. Our people had to negotiate a changing world that did not consider Muskogee tribal cultural power structures that had served us well for generations. In our society, before colonization, there was no hierarchy of human value based on skin color. We did not decide tribal membership on race or blood quantum. There were no jails, no strangers. We had one of the first liberal immigration policies. We understood and respected, I should put this in present, we understood then and understand now, and respected plant and animal intelligence. Everyone had a place and not one was above another. This inherent cultural perspective changed drastically with colonial influence. My great-grandfather really didn't have much to say with words, just his presence doesn't really have much to say with words. Just his presence tells me what I need to remember. Though he was born around 1860 and passed from this world when he was 71 years of age, time means nothing in the place we inhabit together. We speak without the burden of words. This is where I see him, where I find him, in the heart territory, between us. I know the quality of love he carried and the burden. He listens to me complain about failures. Yes, I know about failure, he nods. I can't tell you about being a woman, he says, but God loves all his creations. Not one is above the other. Let's sit together and listen. Then we will pray for a path that will lift up the people, all people, including all the beloved beings of creation. You will find yourself in that lifting up. I have some of my great-grandfather's handwriting on lined paper from his sermon preparations. His handwriting was thoughtful even, and tells of a man who writes with a great tenderness for the gift of life. It tells me that he was a seeker and he loved his people. The church provided an architecture for the deep spiritual awareness that is inherent in our Muskogee Creek people. They love their church and their hymn singing, which is a mix of Muskogee and Judeo-Christian forms. They love their lands, their culture, their ceremonies. They made the church their ceremonial grounds as they structured their worship around our original rituals and practices. These memories and the stories in these words might appear to exist in the long ago, in the short root mind, a kind of mind of a people whose children don't even know the names of their great-grandparents. There is no past. Everything is right now. This kind of mind has its roots in the material culture, in what can be accumulated. My great-grandfather reminds me that we need to keep within the long-rooted mind. Because of the longer roots, we have a larger structure of knowing from which to take on understanding. Thank you for listening. I needed him. And that's what happens when you write, I think, poetry or stories, is that's what we're doing, is listening. I mean, where do the voices come from? You talk to any fiction writer, they'll tell you about how their character doesn't want to behave, or their character has a certain, and it's the same thing in poetry. I'll be writing along and then something, I think, wow, I hadn't thought of it that way before. It even happens in performing, as I'll be speaking and then something, and I say, okay, thank you, because I hadn't thought of that before. So I'm going to read this poem from American Sunrise called How to Write a Poem in a Time of War. It's actually the poem that started the book, An American Sunrise. I had taken a job at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, a chair of excellence. And partly, one, because I really loved the people there, the staff, the faculty, the students. It was a perfect match. And I'm still considered part of them. And stay in touch. Stay in touch with them. And but I also took the job too because it was near our homelands. And when I went to interview, I told them, yes, my great-grandfather Manawi stood over in the overlook and looked down on the town here to see which were the best horses to steal. I said, but he wasn't stealing because these are all part of Muskogee Creek lands, and then Cherokees who came in later. But the Arkansas, well, the Arkansas River too, but the Tennessee River is basically the highway. All the rivers, where they were all the highways that people followed, that people followed. And so what I love about poetry, or what it has given me, the gift it's given to so many of us around the world, is that I see a poem as like a pocket almost, and it can hold grief, it can hold joy, it can hold. We go to poetry at those transformational moments, at those doorways when we know everything is going to change, and we go find a poem that will help us get from here to there, because a poem can hold what we cannot speak sometimes where there are no words. So often you find people in the pandemic, the poetry organizations were, had more readers than ever, because people we need poetry. But this pandemic, we didn't know, and all of these, we know that, and two, we need to change in the way we care for the earth. We need to change in the way we care for each other, in the way we regard each other. So that in those old teachings, whatever culture, whatever, if you look at any of the religions, they'll tell you that we're all one people, or we need to regard each other kindly. So I was so excited. We had I think a semester. I had 2 semesters left, and we were going to go home to Oklahoma. And I was excited to get back home to Tulsa. And I thought, what do I do with this? I am in these beautiful lands, and we went all over the South. We went to places. My family, my husband's the same ceremonial ground, the same tribe. I found a house that had belonged to an uncle. He used to have the largest racing establishment on the Eastern Seaboard. Creek Indian citizen, and all of this history here and beauty. I was in tears down near, it was outside Columbus, Georgia, where a part of my family had lived, and I didn't want to leave. But it's strange when you go to your home and the people are gone, that it's been gutted of your people and your culture, because they were all back they were mostly in Oklahoma. And I thought, what do I do with this? What do I do with it? So I looked out into the trees, and my spirit asked me, okay, what did you learn here? And this is what the book started with, is there's 2 voices in this poem. It's, you can't begin just anywhere. It's a wreck. It's like, where do you begin to unravel history or to try to comprehend? And all of there's so many voices and so many stories, and they're all part of it. We're all part of the story. How to write a poem in a time of war. You can't begin just anywhere. It's a wreck. Shrapnel in the eye of a house, a row of houses. There's a rat scrambling from light with fleshy trash in its mouth. A baby strapped to its mother's back, cut loose. Soldiers crawl the city, the river, the town, the village, the bedroom, our kitchen. They eat everything or burn it. They kill what they cannot take. They rape what they cannot kill. They take. Rumors fall like rain, like bombs, like mother and father tears swallowed for restless peace. Like sunset slanting toward a moonless midnight. Like a train blown free of its destination. Like a seed fallen where there is no chance of trees or any place for birds to live. No, start here. Deer peer from the edge of the woods. We used to see woodpeckers the size of the sun and were greeted by chickadees with their good morning songs. We'd started to cook outside, slippery with dew and laughter, these smoky sunrises. We tried to pretend war wasn't going to happen, though they began building their houses all around us and demanding more. They started teaching our children their God's story, a story in which we'd be slaves. No, not here. You can't begin here. This is memory shredded because it is impossible to hold with words, even poetry. These memories were left here with the trees, the torn pocket of your daughter's hand-sewn dress, the sash, the lace, the baby's delicately beaded moccasin still connected to the foot, a young man's note of promise to his beloved. No, this is not the best place to begin. Everyone was asleep despite the distant bombs. Terror had become the familiar stranger. Our beloved twin girls curled up in their nightgowns next to their father and me. If we begin here, none of us will make it to the end of the poem. Someone has to make it out alive, sang a grandfather to his grandson, his granddaughter, as he blew his most powerful song into the hearts of the children. There, it would be hidden from the soldiers who would take them miles, rivers, and mountains from the naval court place of the origin story. He knew one day, far day, the children would return. Generations later, over slick highways constructed over old trails, through walls of laws meant to hamper or destroy, over stones bearing libraries of the winds. He sang us back to our home place from which we were stolen in these smoky green hills. Yes, begin here. One thing I love about writing poetry, I don't know where I'm going in it, and I don't want to know because that's part of the journey. So when I got to that, and the poem is unscrolling about the grandfather, I knew it had happened, because that's part of healing music. We all have songs that heal us. It can even be a rock song from when we were young and we found that song, just like a poem, as a pocket or a place in which that would hold our spirit, and help get us through a wonderful love affair, a horrible breakup, or just being happy, or a feeling of summer. Some of their songs that I like because they make me feel like I'm in a car with the windows all open, and and you're riding along on a highway without a lot of cars, and you're riding along and the wind feels good. The other thing too, of course, there weren't bombs. I guess there were bombs back there, were cannons, but I was also at that point watching what was going down in Syria, and I think a lot of us were haunted by that image in the news of the twin baby girls, because all of these wars are related, just like every drop of water is related. Even wars, they're related to all of them, and I wanted to honor that family. Let's see. And this poem, This Morning I Pray for My Enemies, which is the name of the album. I have a song on there of this too. This morning I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? An enemy must be worthy of engagement. I turn in the direction of the sun and keep walking. It's my heart that asks the question, not my furious mind. The heart is the smaller cousin of the sun. It sees and knows everything. It hears the gnashing even as it hears the blessing. The door to the mind should only open from the heart. An enemy who gets in risks the danger of becoming a friend. These poems are my teachers too. Their poem is much bigger than I could be or can be at times. It's always teaching me how to, it's really teaching me. Let's see. I'm going to read. Actually, I think I'm going to read this from the memoir. I'm going to read the poem, A Map to the Next World. So please bear with me as I scroll down. I have the first pass proofs, which means I've spent the last several days going over corrections. And I have a whole section, I think this is in the section called Teachers, because that's where it winds up. I start out thinking about sort of what I'd been through, standing at closer to the doorway of where we're all going, to the doorway, the same doorway that the children, the newborns, come through, and thinking about what I've learned here in the teachers. And sometimes the teachers can be a river or an ocean, sometimes an event, a place in which you failed, or a place a place of learning. So this is about writing the poem, A Map to the Next World. And I'll just read, this goes with it. This is all in the Poet Warrior. When my third granddaughter's body was forming, I watched and listened to what was going on in the atmosphere. I was living in Albuquerque then too. To give a clue about this spirit, what she would need once she arrived here to take on her part of the story, I wanted to make a kind of map. The spirit plays about the mother and father during development and can enter and leave the forming physical body at will. We are each very individual even in this matter. Some lodge in the body for most of the pregnancy, others fly in at first breath. This is a very vulnerable time for the pregnant mother, the expecting father, and the whole family as the earth house is being built. What is said or done around the mother and the family can have a deleterious or positive effect on the forming child. Sing songs that inspire. Learn something useful. Do not fight. Don't hang around with angry people or be the angry person. Protect the baby with prayer and goodwill. As I listened, a powerful story was making the rounds in the native community. There was a Navajo woman who lived far out on the reservation at Ahogan, the traditional home of the indigenous people there. She was of a righteous nature, still prayed in the morning with cornmeal, took care of her sheep, and was loved and well respected by her neighbors. She was also blind. She was visited one day by the holy ones. As her hogan filled with the powerful presence of sacredness, the holy ones told her, as they towered over her, that they came to give a warning to the people. We are nearing times where we will experience earth changes, famine, and strife because people are forgetting their original teachings. The holy ones instructed her to tell everyone to keep hold of their traditional ways, to remember prayer, and to care for each other, for all living things, for this earth where they will suffer. I knew that my granddaughter was bringing in special gifts that would assist with these times we are moving into, times in which we are reckoning with our lack of respect and attention to what matters in this place named Earth in English, or Igana Jaga, which is Mother Earth in Muskogee. I told this story at a performance with many Navajo people in attendance. Most nodded their heads in remembering, for holy ones to touch down in that manner is powerful and dangerous. Everyone must pay attention. Afterward, one of the women came up to me and remarked, I saw the footprints of the holy ones in the sand in front of the hogan. They were very long and narrow. We are in those times now. Maybe by the time you read this, we will have learned how to be human. A map to the next world for Desiree Chi. In the last days of the fourth world, I wished to make a map for those who would climb through the hole in the sky. My only tools were the desires of humans as they emerged from the killing fields, from the bedrooms and the kitchens. For the soul is a wanderer with many hands and feet. The map must be made of sand and can't be read by ordinary light. It must carry fire to the next tribal town for renewal of spirit. In the legend are instructions on the language of the land, how it was we forgot to acknowledge the gift, as if we were not in it or of it. Take note of the proliferation of supermarkets and malls, the altars of money. They best describe the detour from grace. Keep track of the errors of our forgetfulness. The fog steals our children while we sleep. Flowers of rage spring up in the depression. Monsters are born there in nuclear anger. Trees of ashes wave goodbye to goodbye, and the map appears to disappear. We no longer know the names of the birds here, how to speak to them by their personal names. Once we knew everything in this lush promise. What I am telling you is real and is printed on in a warning on the map. Our forgetfulness stalks us, walks the earth behind us, leaving a trail of paper, diapers, needles, and wasted blood. An imperfect map will have to do, little one. The place of entry is the sea of your mother's blood, your father's small death as he longs to know himself in another. There is no exit. The map can be interpreted through the wall of the intestine, a spiral on the road of knowledge. You will travel through the membrane of death, smell cooking from the encampment where our relatives make a feast of fresh deer meat and corn soup in the Milky Way. They have never left us. We abandon them for science. And when you take your next breath as we enter the fifth world, there will be no X, no guidebook with words you can carry. You will have to navigate by your mother's voice. Renew the song she is singing. Fresh courage glimmers from planets and lights the map printed with the blood of history, a map you will have to know by your intention, by the language of suns. When you emerge, note the tracks of monster slayers where they entered the cities of artificial light and killed what was killing us. You will see red cliffs. They are the heart, contain the ladder. A white deer will come to greet you when the last human climbs from the destruction. We were never perfect. Yet, the journey we make together is perfect on this earth, who was once a star and made the same mistakes as humans. We might make them again, she said. Crucial to finding the way is this: there is no beginning or end. You must make your own map. I think I'll end with this poem, and called Perhaps the World Ends Here. Although I think what I want to do, the very end, I'm not supposed to give away the end of the book, but it's not, because it comes from a dream I had, and some dreams are I ate too much pizza and movie popcorn dreams. You know those. Yeah. You know those kind of dreams. And some dreams are special. You might see people who've passed, or and they come to visit you. Or this one, I was carrying my seventh generation granddaughter to the world, and I knew this dream was true because I have, with the birth of my grandchildren, somebody always brings them in. I've seen that, and so this is the end. There's a character that winds through, starts out as a girl warrior and becomes poet warrior. So this is the very end of the memoir. Poet warrior stood at the doorway of time. She held the child of the seventh generation in her arms, adjusted the soft blanket to see her face, to glimpse what this one was bringing with her to share. In the way she took every child, grandchild, and great-grandchild into her arms to welcome them, to bless them during her time walking on the earth. Poet warrior smiled as she thought, she looks Japanese. She resembled her daughter Rainey. Poet warrior sang into the baby a song that would give her strength and sustenance, would always call her ancestors to stand before her, no matter the trials, no matter history and heartbreak. Then she walked with her into time to deliver the baby to the earth story that needed her. I think it's that way with all of us. I don't think it's just what I saw, but I think every one of us was brought in by somebody who loves us and is there for us. I'll close this part of our meeting, of our get together, of our circle, is with what I call the kitchen table poem, or perhaps the world ends here. Okay, I think a lot of the kitchen table university, and you can gauge so much by who's at the table. If is it just the kids pouring cereal or processed food, or is it the whole family with all the relatives, or what's being eaten at the table? Is it fresh fruit, or who grew it? Did people sing to the plants? Where did it come from? I mean, one of these days I want to teach a kitchen table class to investigate all these paths and roads to get to the kitchen table, and what it all means. Perhaps the world ends here. The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. We chase chickens or dogs away from it. Babies teethe at the corners. They scrape their knees under it. It is here that children are given instructions on what it means to be human. We make men at it. We make women. At this table, we gossip, recall enemies and the ghosts of lovers. Our dreams drink coffee with us as they put their arms around our children. They laugh with us at our poor, falling down selves, and as we put ourselves back together once again at the kitchen table. This table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at this table. It is a place to hide in the shadow of terror, a place to celebrate the terrible victory. We have given birth on this table and have prepared our parents for burial here. At this table we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite.
I'm waiting for this great applause to break out as I'm hanging on to every word here at the end. And of course we have all multiple hundreds of people muted, so we don't get that sensation. But really, thank you so much for that reading. It was very, I mean, even within the constraints of the virtual world, it came across so touching and beautiful and with such feeling. We're gonna, and I think you can see just the chat going crazy with accolades and praise. We're gonna move now to a more informal conversation Remember, everyone, you do have the ability to type your questions into the chat. It'll go to the panelists. Dr. O'Connor and I will try to incorporate them in as we can. And Dr. O'Connor, if you wouldn't mind beginning the discussion.
Thank you. And I want to echo Julie's comment. That was so beautiful. And thank you for being here with us. That was just lovely to witness. And if you do run a kitchen table class, I, along with many people in the chat, are the first to sign up. So, please let us know. Put it out on the website.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Wouldn't that be cool, though, to have everyone bring in their favorite foods, prepared and otherwise, and then take a list of the ingredients, find out where they came from? I mean, that would be quite an endeavor of research, just to find out all, I think it would be a great class. Anyway, go ahead.
No. Anything more you want to say about that? I'll be glad to drive to Oklahoma from Pennsylvania. A lot of our students are first generation. A little less than half of the students are here, the first ones in their family. And one of my students wanted me to ask that, you wrote about so many difficult things that you experienced in your life. What advice do you have for those, including college students, who are struggling to continue forward as a result of similar situations?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was thinking about, on one side of my family, I have my grandmother, not my great grandmother, my grandmother and my aunt. They had BFAs in art in the early 1900s. And the other side, my mother grew up in a sharecropper family, a mixed blood Cherokee and European mixed, family, and were sharecroppers. And I remember thinking, people would always talk about going to the university. I don't know that anybody talked to me directly about it. And, but that was always a possibility. And I remember thinking, how do I get to the front? I don't even know where the front door is. I mean, I said, where's the front door? I don't even know where to go. I mean, where do you start? And I've thought about that, but I had some wonderful help in Albuquerque, in Santa Fe. I was living in Santa Fe with the 8 Northern Pueblos Talent Search. The staff there were wonderful, and I got to thank Ramos Suina and Joe Abeda for helping me. And but how did I get there? Because I remember just a year or so before that, I was walking around the streets of Tahlequah, Oklahoma. We had no money, and I'm pregnant, washing clothes in the washboard in the bathtub, thinking, how I know there's something else there. How is it going to happen? I have no money. And it starts with, belief. I found a job. I just slowly, I knew that I didn't always know the form. Like I didn't always know how, that I had a deep belief in what would happen. And there were people along the way who believed in me, like Ramos Suina and Joe Beta. And I slowly found my way. But bottom line, the mind is so powerful, and the human spirit is so powerful. I've always loved those stories of people who could lift a car off somebody, something impossible. And sometimes what we do, these acts of like trying to find the front door of a university, is like, it's similar to lifting a car off, what it takes for people. Because a lot of people have more difficult stories about how they would make it along the way. And some of the wisest advice ever given to me was given to me when I was a student at University in New Mexico, and I was very lucky with mentors, and she was from Pueblo, a very wise Pueblo woman, and she looked at me and she says, just be yourself. And that was the hardest thing. I came to realize through the years that it was the wisest advice. And I didn't blow it off, but it sounded so simple. And yet it was the hardest thing, I realized. It's the hardest thing because People may not understand you, like, why are you being a poet? You have two children, you're a single mother. How are you going to make a living? This makes no sense at all. Where your friends were concerned about you, you must not have any common sense, you know, from that. But it's something, you just have to um, listen, and always, I don't know, study is so important. Study of, of certainly of patterns and patterning, but also courses of study. I'm always studying something. It goes on, it doesn't end. And but that's so important to gain knowledge. And I don't necessarily mean the university, because universities are there and that's they're useful, but there's all kinds of ways to gain knowledge. And like, I love hearing about our language and how words mean. And when I started writing poetry, I was a student at University of Mexico, and I was learning Navajo language at the same time, because I got special permission to take Navajo language as my foreign language requirement. And I started writing poetry at the same time, so it had quite an influence on the on writing poetry. But I would just say, be yourself, and know that you are stronger than you think you are. And you do have help, and you can always call on it, even if it's something small. You can call on help, and it does come. It may not come in the form you think it will, but it's always there. Like my great grandfather, like calling on his help, and calling on the help of those who love you.
Thank you. Dr. Naviu?
Yeah, so this one relates kind of to one of your poems that you read for us, about the challenges of women's voices getting heard. And so can you maybe describe some of the steps it took for you to become a successful poet? And would you say it was harder for you finding your voice as a Native American poet or as a woman poet?
I'm not one of those people that I had a hard time finding the voice. My voice came and found me. My voice, as I was not headed to being a poet at all. I was headed towards being a fine art, painter. I love photography too, because I didn't have to speak, and I could let the images speak for me. But I started writing, and and then took poetry class, and it just took over. The voice, I think it's the same voice as my saxophone voice. It's the same voice, the memoir voice. I mean, that's my voice through there. It's the same voice. And I didn't differentiate, well, so is this a woman's voice? Well, or is it a native voice? It's my voice. And sometimes it's not, I don't even think it's totally mine. I'm not saying that I've been taken over by a body snatch or anything like that. I'm just saying that I've learned that voice, and it's larger. It's teaching, it's always teaching me, and it's something large. I keep following it to learn more. It's like something that keeps opening. So when I work, or when I sit down to write, of course I'm aware of my people and where I am, and season and plants and all of that. But it's the voice that comes through all of that experience. When I started writing poetry, I started writing as an undergraduate and as part of an Kiva Club. Is a very active member. That Kiva Club was like social justice center at the University of New Mexico, and we were involved in acts of social justice for against the maltreatment of Native people at so many levels, and sat in, we would go to meetings with coal companies. I remember when there was a uranium spill at Church Rock, and we were there. And I mean, my poetry came out of that. And that voice came out of that. And yes, there was the feminist movement, and I mean, all of that was going on at the same time. And so maybe it just found a right place to be. But yes, I mean, I've been asked that, or I mean, it's like, so, what comes first? Who do you write for? And I always liked what Audre Lorde would say. She'd talk about how she would see a circle of women around a fire, a circle of people, and would see them when she wrote. And for me, I just listen. I'm just listening to that voice. And sometimes I'll write something for someone or write a poem. I don't do a lot of occasional poems. I guess if I were poet laureate of England, I would be required to write official poems for occasions, marks. And those are hard to do, actually. Those can be. I've done a few, but that's not my strong point. Anyway, and I think I'm going far afield of the voice question. But it just, yeah, it just is. It's its own self.
One of my students, I think many students at Slippery Rock are reading Crazy Brave and your poetry. And one of the students wanted me to ask, were you at all nervous when publishing Crazy Brave, because so much of it is so personal and so vulnerable? And the follow-up part of that is, some folks you decided the name, like your brother, and then some folks you would just sort of call the poet. So I guess that's a two-part question.
Okay. Okay, if I forget the second part, remind me. So at this point, I remember a lot of people when they first write poetry, they're terrified to read out loud in class. They don't want to read because it's so personal. And the voice, poetry, I mean, some poetry voices are very personal and some not. And not, even if a voice is personal, it's not always about the poet. There's a speaker of the poem. So I don't know that I separated it that much, because a memoir is your memory, and it is about memory. And of course, our memories can be faulty or selective. I'm a human being. And, but it is, yes. I mean, I've thought about this new memoir coming out too, about but at some point you realize that I think about the purpose or the intent of that memoir was to be helpful. And I know that all of us have been through a lot, and I wanted it to be helpful for people to know, one, there's others out here, and it was just following my path. And so sometimes I wonder about things in there, but I've let it go. I let it go. And there are people I didn't want to name. A lot of people will make up, pseudonyms, but it wasn't necessary. I don't think it's necessary to name everybody, and some people don't. In my new memoir, I paid tribute to a mentor who she did not want she never wanted her name out there. She was a great storyteller and wonderful person. But as what happens in our community sometimes, people are jealous and they go after people. They get very jealous, and she dealt with a lot of that. And she decided, she just wanted to. So I was very careful too in not naming where she was, not naming which community she was from, because she brought many gifts to the people, but people, I don't know what to do about all of us. Sometimes even, it's and it's ongoing. So you just have to make those kinds of choices. Talk to any memoirist. Some people don't. Some people just name everybody. Some people are on a vendetta, to retribution. But that's not where I'm going with these. Maybe people want to read and want to know who I was with and what da 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 da. It's not that kind of thing. The memoir form and I was told with Poet Warrior that I've reinvented memoir, but it's more about the teaching that comes through, about what I've learned, and what I can pass on. And some of it's difficult, but I always try to honor, like my mother started taking this one over too. And but her, of course, our mothers, we all come through the doorway of our mother. And, but it's important not to, we all, that's all I'm going to say about it. That's all I'll say about that.
So this next question kind of combines that personal aspect with how a lot of your poetry deals in history. The question comes from students at the University of Maryland, East Shore, but it also combines a question we had from Ronald Rochin in the chat. Sorry, Ronald, if I got your name mispronounced. So this year marks the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. For those in the audience, this event, even today, is considered one of the worst incidents of racial violence in US history. So I know you said you don't write a specific poem to commemorate a specific event, but as a Tulsa native, how do you reconcile violent histories such as this one with a sense of pride or familiarity with one's hometown? Do you or have you in your work kind of tackled Tulsa's history?
I have a poem. I'll read it. It was just appeared in World Literature Today. It's a great magazine, by the way. It's a wonderful magazine, and there's a whole section of incredible writers. Patricia Smith has a poem in there. Clements Hurd has a poem. I think Laura, what's her last name? Laura Thomas has a story. Rilla Askew has a piece. There were several pieces on the race massacre. And so I agreed to acknowledge this part of history. And most of us growing up in Tulsa didn't know about it. Most of the community, we did not, nor did we know Native history, in the schools much, nor did we know there were Native poets in the schools, or I did hear about Paul Dunbar in poetry and Langston Hughes, but we never heard about Natives. But I was wondering, because I don't always have the easiest time trying to write to a prompt. It's called what they now call prompts. And I thought, how do you write about massacre? How do you write about injustice? Of course, I do it. I have a poem called Strange Fruit in Mad Love and War and it just kind of came to me. I went into the voice of the young woman who was lynched. And so I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. I was writing notes, and my studio, the Tulsa Artist Fellowship gave me, I'm in an apartment they gave gave me right in the Brady district, and about 2 blocks over is my studio, and that's about a block away from that is where that Black Wall Street, that town, really, that community was burned down and people were killed. And you know who first told me about the Tulsa Race Massacre was Adrienne Rich. Yes, you talk about a student of history. Adrienne Rich told me, and so I went and looked it up. I was shocked. Not surprised given what I know of the racism in this town, or in the world or in the South. But so I wrote this poem called Somewhere, and it's in a ghazal form. And I was trying to figure out, I was walking down the street. It was really windy like today. The wind was just blowing everything. And this woman stopped me on the corner. She was beautiful. And when I go back in my memory, she's beautiful, like an African queen, but she was homeless and half-dressed and had made her own little universe at the corner, a temporary universe. And it's called Somewhere. It was a day of brutal winds, all of them ganging up to blow injustice down. They sang the changing weather. I was going nowhere. Anything on the ground not burdened by gravity was twisted and lifted up to drop. There were dream cities in plastic bags. I was going nowhere. I tightened my coat to the approaching winter, but you cannot duel and win against a season, history, or murder of winds. Shooting down MLK Boulevard, I was approaching Archer, the juncture of several histories. A burned street of wishes was smoking there. I was going nowhere. I just wanted to get home, but where is home? I always asked the sky, where, no matter where I roam. An old Muskogee map is different. We know by trees, rocks, and the obligations of relatives. We might be going nowhere. Our roads aren't nice lines with numbers. They wind like bloodlines through gossip and stories of the holy and the winds. History is everywhere. 3 tribal nations met here. We weren't going to go anywhere. At the corner of justice and fight, the thought of the miraculous was miles from my mind. It was nowhere in my mind. It was curled up in a distant field in the heart of a once loved country. Then I saw books flying from an unseen woman's hands, shoes that never fit her or anyone, and poetry everywhere. She was going nowhere. I had been thinking of the massacre down the street from here and how ghosts keep their place among us. How I might be a ghost set loose in the wind, walking with a ghost of fire. And then there she stood, a ruined goddess, half naked on the sidewalk, classic Africa in her stance of beauty. We are going nowhere. Excuse me, she called out to me. There is no excuse for this raw story of abuse, and no clothes will fit this moment of the tale, nothing good enough for her beauty. She was a child when the first man took her. Her home is paying naked, without clothes. Where was her father, her mother? Burning. There is nowhere, nowhere. Time is always moving. It is we blood carriers who stay rooted to the gravity of hurt. The story has to be told to be free, like a tree lifted in a breeze. If we don't tell it, the stillness will. I could give her my jeans, my jacket, my shoes. I searched her mind as it flew in the wind. My mind chased her mind through tunnels of time. It was going nowhere. There is no excuse, sang the winds of forgotten history as they covered her up with a ragged blanket stitched with loneliness to take her with them. I was feeling my pockets for change, for guns to protect her, nails and lumber to rebuild all the houses burned by hatred. I only found a pen without paper. History goes nowhere. It is always female power that bears truth to righteousness of any new nation. Liberty guards the harbor, Sacagawea, the river of discovery, the Virgin de Guadalupe, the earth. And here, the one for whom I have no name is not nameless. The mass grave is a grave of names. Without knowing them, we are going nowhere. I see her now on every corner, the miracle the winds brought, a song made by the rejects of history, wearing clothes that cover nothing. She is everywhere. I turn up the music. It is from my it's from my girlhood, just miles up the road. Blood tails run through our bones like these streets made of the unspeakable. The winds will never stop telling the truth. I thought I was going nowhere. So that's a good trick if you're trying to figure out a poem, is to find a form. And that form helped. It was like the wind, like the wind tunneling through these streets.
The next question actually is a really beautiful follow-up to that. Since you're speaking to a consortium of 14 different colleges and universities from across the US, what responsibility do you think higher education has to social justice? What responsibility do our students have who are the new leaders?
I like what you said about, I heard the word leaders, and I think it's important to train everyone for leadership. I've come to that because I remember I would hear about leadership training and think, I never thought that it pertained to me. But what would happen if everyone was trained to be a leader? And that those qualities of leadership, included an openness to history, to the corrections of history, to compassion, to an education that included other kinds of modes of education and other modes of education, and education that also included service to others, even service to a kind of history. what happens, what I see is people think they will lose, or that there's a meta story or major story that can't be shifted, but it's a living thing. I think of history as a living body, or the country even as a living, there's a soul to it. And, the story, like America, will not grow up until the richness, the diversity of, until that diversity is allowed to fully be present. I'm not saying that it would be better if I took time to, write this out. So I'm finding the response as I'm talking, so please bear with me. But every story needs, even the stories that conflict, and and as memoir, I know that if I were to take, and I would like to do a memoir like this where there's one thing that happens, and so it would be kind of like a joint memoir or a group memoir, and everyone tells their story, and they might disagree, but the disagreement, they can all be there in a space. That one does not need to overtake or kill another just to have predominance. I mean, where does that come from? Where is what is this about the need to own the story, or to have a hierarchy of storytelling that says if you're from a Western European country, then your stories are up here, and if you're an indigenous female stories, your stories have less value. Or astronomy, the study of astronomy, for instance. When I worked with it, I have a friend who's an astronomer, and we worked on a collection of photographs and prose together, and he was telling me one time about having a meeting with Navajo astronomers, one-on-one, respectfully. I guess that's the word, would be respect, sitting across from each other, sharing. That's the difference. He learned a lot, and he said there were they were in agreement, on basics and so on. So I would see, an education taking a turn in that way, and also noting that humanities is essential to even the arts, because the arts carry culture, are essential to what it means to developing a whole, a healthy and rounded society. We need all of those parts. We need the sciences and STEM, but we also need the storytellers and higher thought, and the ability to think and write conceptually, even poetically, which is a lot like when I wind up at conferences with different disciplines. I always wind up with the mathematicians. Yeah, I think it's, with music too, we're working similarly, and we work towards similar problems or challenges, but we come about it in maybe a little bit different. We come to responses in a little bit different manner, but sometimes it's the same thing.
Somebody who teaches creative writing, that answer makes me so happy.
Dr. O'Connor and I were just talking, 6 hours ago today, about how sometimes the science students are sometimes also our strongest humanities students. I had another question geared up for you, but you already started to go into it. I'll ask it and see if you have elaboration or not. It's that as the US has increasingly valued sciences over the humanities and arts, what role do you feel that literature and the arts can do? What work can or even should it do?
Well, I think we've seen the work of poetry during this pandemic and this time of social unrest, how people have turned to poetry. Why? Because of its ability to hold communication, for even divisive, it's a way to communicate beyond political hype or political language. They hold everything. I wish I've thought about trying to write something that would speak to those who are suspicious of the arts and artists, that would speak to them, tell them about how they would have no world without art and artists. The greatest artist, of course, is the creator. I mean, look at all of this trees, all the amazing design of this world. Where all the creatures of this world that we're in, and that the artists and the thinkers were following in that path, because it's, as any living society, any living culture is, it's constantly shifting and moving, and that's where the freshness, the artists bring in fresh water, so to speak. They bring in fresh ideas, fresh, to keep, to which enliven and nourish a culture, nourish a people. And yeah, that's it. So we need, just as in a biosystem, just the same as in a biosystem, where you watch, diversity is usually a principle. There's diversity. Well, why not diversity of thought? Why not diversity of religion? Why not diversity of pedagogy? Why not, diversity of approaches, etc., to enliven and to, even classical forms continue with that kind of, even diversity within that classical form. Even a language, say English language, for instance, it has been grown by what other peoples have brought to it, and so on and so on.
Before Mark jumps in with the next question, we had a great short line from Sanjay Mishra to the panelists, so you guys can't see it in the chat. It says, "Art is the soul if STEM is the body." And we just wanted to acknowledge that.
Okay.
Speaking of art, could you talk a little bit about your beautiful background? I think you certainly win the prize for the best background today.
I know, we were talking earlier, and I said I was thinking about getting photographs of some of the most incredible libraries in the world, and then using them, using different ones. This is my background, but this is, in a way, this is a kind of library too, of plants. It's a blown up part of a piece of beadwork, a traditional Muskogee Creek beadwork that I photographed years ago when I was taken out to the National Museum of the American Indian, to their archive. They're building the archive, I think it's in Maryland, I think is where it is. And these designs, I mean, it's a science lesson. It's also a lesson in, there's a science lesson here about plants and their meanings, as well as it's a design, it's part of, it's art, and they're often connected. I mean, if you look at any of the, probably almost any design that we've come up with in the world will have its counterpart in the natural world. And so that's, I have other ones. I have, my daughter's turned in, she's become an incredible artist with beadwork. But yeah, so anyway, that's what that is. And again, you could use that. You could start a whole class with this. What are the ancestors? I did that once with a class of poetry. I had everyone bring in a poem, and it was undergrad. So I said, it can't be your own poem. It has to be a poem by a living or past poet, but it has to be a poem by somebody who has influenced you, a poem you love. And then we started, through the whole semester, through a series of exercises and things, we uncovered the ancestors of that poem, maybe the form, the word, any number of things. And by the end of the semester, we had quite a genealogy going of poetry, to see how poems are related, how poets are related, ways of constructing a poem, ideas about poems, and you wind up with a whole tree of poetry ancestors.
So you had in there some ideas and information with talking with students, and this is a student question You've experienced so many different things throughout your life that many people have never experienced. What advice do you give to those who are struggling to continue forward as a result of experiences or situations?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. There is. I went to writing. Art did that for me too, but partly why I went to writing poetry or just to writing, because sometimes it helps us to write things out. You have to find a way to reconcile. That doesn't mean condoning, or it doesn't mean necessarily accepting in a certain way. You have to come to a point saying, okay, this is what happened. You have to come to a point so that it has no more power. It doesn't become that a negative experience or horrible or something even unthinkable that happened that maybe can never be reconciled on some way, because there are things that happen to us in history you just can't make sense of them. They will never make sense. You think about the death of children, you think about the torture of children or people, or what people do to other people. Some of those things just cannot be reconciled. Sometimes they're too much for the mind to bear. So what you have to do is construct. You can ask for help too. There's all kinds of help. But it's about, you have to find a place for it to be, because it is. And you have to find a way so that you can recognize it, you see it where it is, but you have to put it somewhere that it has no power over you. And sometimes you use that, you write a novel with it, or it can, because you don't want that to, it can propel you into something, towards something better, because there is something better. Sometimes we don't understand why why those things happen. That's what happened to me. I think I was pretty suicidal when I was younger, and I realized that I would either have to take those experiences and let them be material, or I was going to, I had to construct a road. And sometimes it felt like no one else was there, and sometimes they weren't, because there was something I had to learn on my own. Of course, that spiritual help is always there. But that's the thing, is to know that, I think it's important to know too that, we were created, everybody has a place here, and we were all created we came into this world to learn and to be challenged. And some people have incredible challenges. But what I was taught was that those who, it's like a teacher. You have a teacher and a student. You've got a brilliant student, and they keep, no matter what you throw at them, they just, they ace it. So you have to think about, when you're in those kind of situations, is that you are very well loved, and you have a teacher who said, okay, we're going to give you this test. We're going to give you one of the most difficult tests, and let's see what you make of it, because I believe in you, and I believe you can come through this, and your mind will be tested, and your body and your spirit will be tested, but you can make it to the other side, and you can use what you learn to help others. And you have to make sense of it in your own way. I mean, that's how some of the greatest novels have been written. How some of the greatest, you often hear, well, the young woman who, at the inaugural poem, she had had voice, speaking problems. I mean, that's somebody who went through not being able to, had speech problems, and then winds up giving an incredible inaugural performance. So that's what she did with it. I mean, there's all kinds of examples. And I don't know, there's so much more to say about that.
We're going to have two more questions. I get the second to last one. When you were glossing the poem, The Fight for Us, you said we all go through fights. There's a turning wheel of worries. but there's a power in naming something. Could you talk about that a little bit?
It kind of goes back to the last question, is if you can name it. And even in the poem I just read about, and here the one for whom I have no name is not nameless. So I'm naming them, even with, ironically without the name, and saying this is who you are and I recognize you. I recognize you as my sister or my relative, my brother. Yes, there's a lot of power in saying, and in a story, and telling a story, and saying, and having a space to tell a story. I think that's it. For so long, people. I write about one of those things when, because natives, we were always being stopped in cars when I was coming up, and being roughed up by the police. And there are times where you can't name that, or you can't say it, or you're in danger. It's important to be able to name your story, to say the names. That's why the power, I think about that sometimes, of that Vietnam War memorial, why it is so powerful, by that young Asian American, what was her name,
Maya Lin.
Yeah, Maya Lin, with that commission. That was so powerful because it was naming. Everyone has a name. I think if we remembered that everybody has a name, there's a story, they have a place. It's really about respect. And even those people that are just horrifying in their acts, I try to think about, well, okay, in my community, I would think, well, you look at somebody like that, and I would think, well, they're young, or they wouldn't act like that, even if they're in their 80s or 70s. Some people, that they're young. I don't know. I don't have the answers for everything, but certainly knowing that you have a place is really important. That you have a place in the story. You have a place at the table. In this country, for so long, natives have been basically disappeared. There's been secretaries of interiors there was a secretary of interior who his goal was to get rid of all the natives. And now here's Deb Holland, who was my poetry student, actually. Yeah, she was my wonderful poet writer. She's a very good writer, published, and became my friend. But I always remember her coming into my office at the University of New Mexico carrying her motorcycle helmet, because riding a motorcycle ate up fewer resources. That's how she was thinking then as a student, years before. It's not an act, that's who she is. So just that little, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
We have gotten several questions from people who want recommendations from you of who they should be reading, what they should be doing. You've mentioned Deb. I think you mentioned Amanda Gorman. But maybe who is someone in your view who's maybe like a morally courageous poet writing today, but maybe that people in the audience might not know, and you think they really should?
Oh man, I'd have to think about that. Morally courageous. I think Naomi Shihab Nye is wonderful. I mean, there's so many. I was thinking too, the Penguin Classics just brought out James Welch's novel, Winter in the Blood, in the Penguin Classics. I don't know. He might be the first native in that series. Yeah, people should name people too in the chat, because I shouldn't. I need to make a list of people, But yeah, so I think Leslie Silko, for one, who is. I knew her poetry first, and she was always a little edgy in her poetry and what she spoke. Of course, Audre Lorde, I've mentioned her more than once. Adrienne Rich is morally courageous. Oh man, there's so many. I was thinking of probably all of the poets in this. When the light of the world was subdued, our songs came through. The Norton Anthology of Native Poetry that uh, several of us, all Native poets as experts, wrote. Layli Long Soldier would be one, a poet. Natalie Diaz, Jake Skeets, another Navajo poet. Um, I don't know, there's so many. I think Gwendolyn Brooks. I keep going back to her and her place and when she was writing in this country and what she had been through and how she found her voice and wrote for a community and how she's inspired so many of us. That song that played at the beginning, An American Sunrise, it was the second song, was written in a form that Terrence Hayes invented called, and I love his last book of poetry, um, of American Sonnets. He invented a form called Golden Shovel that honors her by you take a line of one of her poems and the each word becomes the ending word of a line, and that poem is from that form, American Sunrise. So that's to honor her. Oh man, there's Ray Youngbear. I think he's a great poet. His fiction is good too, or his kind of memoir fiction.
You're seeing my screen color change as I'm like typing it furiously into a Word document, all the names that you're coming up with, as well as a few of our attendees have them. I can see Viola Cordova went to everyone, but also Natalie Diaz, as you mentioned, is in the chat. Couple of fellow Brooks fans in there. But really, thank you, Joy, for your time today and for a really thought-provoking performance and conversation. And thank you to all of you who have attended this event. It's been lovely to see so many people in the room, and I wish all of you a really terrific evening.
Well, thank you so much. I was so happy to come back to Slippery Rock. I wish I were in person, but
Thank you, Troy.
thank you. I know I don't want to leave, but I guess I will.